This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the result against Tottenham by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you an exclusive interview with Roy Hodgson and Scott Dan after the game. So let's begin. Just as he did in a fixture 2 seasons earlier, Heung-min Son netted the only goal of the game to clinch victory for Tottenham Hotspur against Palace at Wembley. Before they went behind though, the Eagles had created the game's most dangerous chances, with Scott Dan seeing a header well saved in the first half, and in the second Wilfried Zaha rounded the keeper but fired wide of an empty net as they stunned their London rivals. However, the Derby Day delights would be felt north of the river as Son popped up in the 64th minute to curl a shot from just outside the box around Julian Speroni to snatch all points for Spurs, despite another brave showing from Roy Hodgson's side. Although seeing their opponents cruise to victory against Real Madrid just 4 days earlier, the Eagles more than matched their hosts for the majority of the game, causing them plenty of worries throughout. That began just a couple of minutes in when Mamadou Sakho was fractions away from connecting with a Zaha cross, but the ball flashed just past his head. Palace's game plan of sitting deep, soaking up attacks and attempting to profit from set pieces and counter-attacks was obvious, but effective as Mauricio Pochettino's team barely troubled Speroni. A bouncing hurricane effort and a miscued header from an unmarked Danny Rose was the best they had mustered in the first half, but the left-back was afforded too much space and he scampered down the flank once again on 34 minutes, which led to Kane heading over. But 60 seconds later the ball was at the other end of the National Stadium, in the form of a Palace corner which Dan diverted goalwards. However, Gazzaniga, making his first Premier League appearance in nearly 2 years, showed no signs of rushing by stooping low and flicking away what proved to be the best chance of the opening 45 minutes. Hodgson would have been very satisfied with how his side looked the likeliest to take a merited lead, and after the restart they had further opportunities. 2 minutes after play resumed, Andros Townsend picked out a loose pass on the halfway line and drove to the edge of the area to carve out a nice angle to fire bottom corner, but Gazzaniga managed to palm away the ex-Spurs man's outring attempt away for a corner. But on 57 minutes a golden opportunity went begging. Another swift break saw Townsend play a perfect arching pass into the feet of the galloping Zaha, who took it around the stranded Gazzaniga, but with the goal gaping open the winger couldn't quite find the accuracy he needed and threaded the ball past the far post. Despite that scare, the best chances kept falling to the visitors. However, having lost both Hugo Lloris and Victor Worm during the week due to injury, Spurs' third choice goalkeeper Gazzaniga was proving to be a more than able deputy as he beat away a Luka Milivojevic header after a corner deflected into the Serbian's path. But the cruel nature of football reared its ugly head again on 64 minutes, as Tottenham netted their first threatening attempt on Speroni's goal. Rose was once again handed too much space in the box and had a shot blocked, before the ball was recycled out to Moussa Sissoko on the right. He fed it back into the danger area where Kabay could only clear to Son, who was lurking in the middle of the D. He took a touch before stroking it into the net to snatch an undeserved lead. With 10 minutes to go, the South Korean could have sealed the win when he escaped behind the Eagles' back line and went 1-on-1 with Speroni. But after deceiving the Palace custodian, he stroked the ball into the side netting. However, despite some late pressure, Hodgson's team couldn't quite make it a 5th of November to remember, as another strong showing didn't yield the points their performance deserved. Crystal Palace slipped into a 9th defeat in 11 Premier League games on Sunday as they lost out 1-0 against Tottenham Hotspur. The Eagles put in a spirited performance at Wembley and had chances of their own, but were undone by a Heung-min Son strike midway through the second half. But what do we learn from the game? Here are 5 things. Number 1. Dan's the man. There aren't many defenders who've been able to keep Harry Kane quiet this season, but Crystal Palace's defenders dealt with the Premier League's top scorer pretty well at Wembley, with the Tottenham man limited to just a couple of half chances. Scott Dan was pivotal to that, with the Palace captain having a fine game at the back for the Eagles to help nullify Tottenham's captain. Number 2. Missed opportunity. This was a Tottenham team not at their best, with the hosts missing a number of key players through injury. Crystal Palace created several chances themselves and could and probably should have been ahead before Heung-min Son's second half strike. Tottenham boss Mauricio Pochettino admitted afterwards that Spurs were not at their best, and the Eagles will be left regretting their inability to take their chances. Number 3. The wait for a clean sheet continues. Crystal Palace have now conceded 22 goals in 11 games so far this season, and while they were untroubled for large periods of the game at Wembley, they were undone by Heung-min Son's strike from just outside the box. They are the only side in the Premier League not to have kept a clean sheet this season, with their last shutout coming back in May against Hull City. But Palace do not have the worst record when it comes to goals conceded this season, with West Ham having conceded one more goal than them. And Stoke City and Everton, who currently sit 14th and 15th respectively, are Palace's next two opponents, having both also conceded 22 goals. Number 4. What is it about goalkeepers playing a blinder against Palace? Not for the first time this season, Crystal Palace have come up against a goalkeeper in inspired form. Last week it was Joe Hart playing superbly for West Ham United, and this week it was Tottenham's third choice goalkeeper Pablo Gazzaniga. The former Southampton man was making his Spurs debut, but in the words of Tottenham boss Mauricio Pochettino, he played fantastically well, making several saves to deny the Eagles. On another day, Palace would have gone on to win the game, having had 11 shots on goal, including 3 on target. And number 5, another unwanted record. Crystal Palace have now gone 8 games in a row away from home without scoring, with their last goal on the road coming at Liverpool in April. And by not scoring a goal at Wembley, they have become only the second team to fail to score in their first 6 away games in the Premier League season. Derby County currently hold the record at 8 in their disastrous 2007-8 season, so Palace must score in one of their next 2 away games to avoid equalling that. And who is up next away from home? Oh yes, Brighton and Hove Albion. So now I'm going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place for you to join in with discussions and share your opinions with other fans. And also, if you do like to share your videos and photos and maybe a news article you found with other fans, then of course the Facebook group is a great place for you to do so. So if you are a fan who likes to share your opinion, read others' opinion and post stuff so that others can see it, then do of course join the Facebook group, because much like a forum, it is a really great place for you to interact with other fans. But another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments, so if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, and that is rating the players from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best. And you can do this and comment below this along with your views of the game, and even if you don't want to do your player ratings, then of course do feel free to drop any views, any comments about the game or about the referee or about the lineup, anything you want to share about the game, then do feel free to drop that in the YouTube comments below. And that's purely because I can come back on the video and see what the listeners thought about the game, so not just, you know, looking back at my view of the game, but also hear what the guys listening thought. Also, anyone else who comes to the video, whether they be Spurs fans, whether they be Palace fans, they can come to the video, read what other fans thought about the game, and you know, if they disagree they can comment. So it's a really great place in the YouTube comments for you to share your opinion. And even if there's something you comment and maybe people might not disagree, might not agree with you, then do feel free still to put it down, because I'm sure that little bit of discussion that will create will be beneficial for both people, because I personally am someone who likes to read comments who I may not necessarily agree with, but I like to hear everyone's opinion. So like I've said, if you are someone who likes to share your opinion and likes to read other people's opinion, then do feel free to drop your comments below in YouTube comments. And if you do have a comment which is really good, then I may even comment and reply to your comment as well. So like I said, do comment below the video. So if you do want to follow any and join any of these social media pages and groups, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But now I'm going to move on to my player ratings, starting in goal with Julian Speroni, who I am going to give a 6. Had nothing to do apart from pick the ball out of his net in the second half. Could do nothing with Son's excellent curler. So Julian Speroni here, I've given him a 6, and much like what I keep repeating in the last few games, I've given him a 6, and that's purely because he had an alright game, didn't do anything fantastic, but didn't make any massive errors through the game. And when you have a goalkeeper who's very quiet in the game, they don't really have to make many saves, they don't have to do much in the game, you would expect them to just do the basics right. And Speroni, when called upon, he could, you know, claim a cross or make a low drive or, you know, pick the ball up from a back pass and spread the ball. So everything you wanted him to do, he done in this game. And the reason I've given him a 6 is purely because he had nothing to do, and the only thing he did do, especially in the second half, is he picked the ball out of his own net. So actually, obviously he didn't have much to do, and then in the second half he had even less to do other than pick the ball out of the net. And in terms of Son's goal, you know, I've talked about this with a few mates of mine, I've seen it on social media. It's a really great goal from Son. I'll go on to talk about Cabaye later, but Cabaye's weak clearance gave the ball to Son. He took one touch, lovely touch, and it was a lovely curling effort into the net. So there's no way Speroni could have saved that. So in terms of the goal, can't put any blame on him. But then in terms of the rest of the game, so other than picking the ball out of his net, he didn't really have to do that much in the game, and that's why I've given him a 6. But in terms of his performance as a whole, obviously first half didn't have, more or less had nothing to do. Second half only really picked the ball out of the net, and you know, apart from a couple of saves he made here and there and actually commanding his area, unlike what Wayne Hennessy does. In fact, the fact that he actually commands his defence, he makes sure that they're positioned right. And when you consider how good our defensive performance was, in the fact that we were quite solid, and it took Spurs a really good goal like Son's to actually break us down, when you consider that, you've also got to put some praise onto Speroni for marshalling and patrolling, let's say, his backline really well. But Julian Speroni here, the legend, he's really close, I think, now to breaking that 400 appearances banner, or that barrier. So hopefully in the next few games he continues to play, because as the weeks are going on, he's looking more comfortable in goal, looking a bit more confident, looking a bit more fitter. So hopefully, obviously no disrespect to Wayne Hennessy, but from what I've seen from Julian Speroni in the few games he's played this season, I'd rather have Speroni in goal than have Hennessy in goal. But hopefully in the next few games he gets the chance, he continues to be number one, and hopefully he can break that barrier of that 400 appearances, and that would be quite an incredible achievement for him. And also it would be quite good for the club, because even though morale isn't the best at the minute, if you get a legend hitting that landmark, it'd be, you know, quite a good thing. But Julian Speroni here, I've given him a 6. Couldn't really do too much about the goal, and other than picking the ball out of his net from that goal, he didn't really have that much to do. Now to move on to the right back, Timothy Fosu-Mensah, who I am going to give a 6. Enjoyed a proper battle against Danny Rose, but did let the Spurs left back have too much space and a free header in the first half. So Fosu-Mensah here, I've given him a 6, and much like his performance last weekend against West Ham, when he came off the bench and had an impact on the game and helped us to go forth in the second half and push for that equaliser, I thought he had a really decent game here. And when you consider how good Spurs have been this season, the defence as a whole, the fact that we kept it to a 1-0 to a fantastic goal, shows how well the defence played throughout. But in terms of Fosu-Mensah's game as a whole, I thought he was rightly deserved his place back in the squad, and I did predict that he'd be starting in the game. Obviously, if you look back at my preview to the game, I did predict that he'd start the game, and obviously he started the game at right back, and I thought he'd done a really great job. And when you consider how he performed last weekend against West Ham, I thought he totally deserved to be in the starting 11 against Spurs. But in terms of the player he was marking, so playing on the right hand side, or Spurs' left hand side, you know, I thought Fosu-Mensah defended alright against Danny Rose. You know, there were quite a lot of times where Danny Rose, who was playing as that sort of left wing back role, he was given way too much space on that flank. So Fosu-Mensah, obviously we're trying to keep compact and trying to stop Harry Kane and Son, but because he was so narrow at times, much like what I've criticised Joe Ward in the past, because he was narrow, there were a few times where Danny Rose had so much space that he was able to A, have a shot, which he did in the first half, or B, you know, have a free header, or even C, you know, actually run into the box. And that's something which I've criticised Joe Ward for, the fact that if he plays so narrow, he gives the wing back or the left back or the winger too much room and too much space so they can run in the box. And in this game, although Fosu-Mensah done alright, that was one thing we could criticise him for, the fact that he didn't actually, you know, he was playing too narrow and gave, you know, the left back Danny Rose too much space. And like I've said, because he gave him too much space, there was a chance where he had a free header. So if Fosu-Mensah was playing slightly more wide where he was meant to be, you know, playing in that right back role, he probably would have gone forth and maybe headed that clearance away. But in terms of the battle, I thought he'd done really well. You know, Danny Rose, we know how fast he is, we know how tricky he is to contain, and sometimes, you know, he was probably, when Spurs went forward, he was probably one of Spurs' most attacking players, let's say, because of Danny Rose's pace. And quite frequently, you know, Danny Rose ventured forward quite a lot, and the majority of the time Fosu-Mensah defended alright against him, and that's why I've given him a 6. But to criticise him, on quite a lot of occasions he did give him too much space. And you know, when you consider that Spurs, much like what we sometimes do with Slupp and Vanano or Ward and Zaha, whatever formation we're playing, we sometimes like to overlap, and Danny Rose certainly was overlapping quite a lot and taking advantage of the fact that Fosu-Mensah was giving Spurs so much space down that left hand side. But obviously, I've heard this on whole radio, and I personally thought it was a really great point which they brought up, and that's the fact that obviously in this game Ward played at left back, which he doesn't normally do, and most of the panel, including, obviously I'm not in the panel, but I agreed with what they said in terms of Joe Ward playing at left back. Because he got the help of Jeffrey Slupp, Ward playing out of position had a really great game. Whereas in this game on the opposite side, Fosu-Mensah, yes, we know he's comfortable in that right back role, but because he was playing so narrow, maybe you could say that's because he's trying to cover, but then obviously he should be playing out wide, but maybe someone like Loftus-Cheek, who was playing down that flank, should have been coming back and helping him. So say, I don't know what the game plan was, but let's say that Roy Hodgson said to Ward and said to Fosu-Mensah, okay, you've got to stay narrow. If that was the case, then okay, ultimately you're going to get Spurs having so much space down that flank, but then you've also got to realise that actually the winger or the midfielders need to come and cover. So in this case, Fosu-Mensah should have been, obviously he was playing narrow, but he should have been covered by Loftus-Cheek. So Loftus-Cheek, like what Slupp was doing on the opposite side, when Spurs were on the attack, Loftus-Cheek should come back, help defend Fosu-Mensah, purely because Fosu-Mensah was playing so narrow that there was so much space. And because, you know, Loftus-Cheek, which I've criticised him for the fact that he's not necessarily the best defensively, when he went, if Loftus-Cheek went back and defended, then quite a lot of times Danny Rose wouldn't have had as much space as he would have liked, purely because Loftus-Cheek would have closed him down, and then Fosu-Mensah, because there's another man there playing in that narrow position, he would have had even less to, you know, go forth and, you know, stop him having too much space. But in terms of his performance, you know, a really great performance from Fosu-Mensah. You know, not the best, but in terms of the physical battle, I thought he'd done really well against Danny Rose, against Harry Kane. And when you consider Harry Kane, he's the top striker in the Premier League. Some could argue he's the best in the world. I don't know at the moment whether I could say that, and someone certainly asked Roy Hodgson that in his press conference. But Harry Kane, one of the best strikers in the world currently. We managed to keep him quiet, and I think Fosu-Mensah deserves some credit for his physical game. But I've given him a 6 because I thought it was an alright game from him. He done alright to contain Danny Rose. But in the future games, even if he is playing quite narrow, he still needs to make sure that he doesn't give, you know, the left back or the left wing back too much space, and, you know, give them time on their wing to actually get the ball into the box. But other than that, other than giving the players too much space, a good performance from him. Now to move on to the centre-back, Mamadou Sakho, who I am going to give a 7. Plenty of defensive headers and blocks as per, but had a great chance to open the scoring in the second half, but wanted too much time in the box when a first-time volley would have done. Probably should have had a penalty too in the first half. So Mamadou Sakho here, I've given him a 7, and once again, you know, in terms of our defensive performance, it was very good, but Mamadou Sakho, along with Scott Dann, was one of the key players in terms of our defensive performance. And a word I used quite a lot last season to describe his performances were a rock, and I personally think we could use that word again in this game, because I thought he was a rock in this game. He was calm on the ball, and in terms of his defensive play, he was winning. Although the commentators may say he wasn't winning headers, I thought he was playing really well defensively in terms of headering the ball away, and he certainly put his body on the line. So whether he'll be blocking with his foot, with his chest, or even, you know, with any other parts of his body, he'll put his body on the line to make a block and to stop Spurs having chances. And when you look back at the stats, and when you consider Spurs, who have been one of the best attacking teams this season, when you consider they didn't actually have that many clear-cut chances to score, you've got to put credit on the centre-backs especially, but, you know, mainly to Mamadou Sakho, because he was the guy who not only was winning headers and, you know, putting in blocks, but he was putting his body on the line, much like what Damien Delaney done a few seasons back. He put his body in the way of the ball, you know, to stop Spurs having many chances. But in terms of the first half, you know, the second half, you know, he could have scored. You know, he could have scored in the first half, or could have won a penalty with a header, but I'll go on to talk about that later. But in terms of the second half, there was a chance the ball came to him in the box, and obviously where he's not instinctively a striker, obviously he's tried to you know, want too much time in the box, took too many touches, when actually a first time volley, even if it did go over, that first time volley, with the time he had in the space, it probably would have been better for him just to hit it first time and try his luck, as opposed to trying to take time in the box and not get the best opportunity forward. But in terms of that, he's showing that not only defensively he's got a good part to his game, but also offensively he can strike a ball, but unluckily in this case he didn't strike it quite well enough. And you know, obviously he used to play as a striker for PSG, but I certainly think maybe, obviously we throw Scott down up front, but maybe Mamadou Sakho, when we're attacking a corner or maybe a free kick, maybe Mamadou Sakho could also be a new threat in the box. But in terms of what I mentioned already, the first half, probably could have had a penalty in the first half. Now, I've seen a lot of people debate this. Homesdale Radio definitely agreed with what I personally think, that it was a penalty. I've seen former referees say it definitely is a penalty. And when you consider the Spurs keeper, who had a fantastic game, he basically punched Sakho in the head. So if a player punches someone in the head, whether it be accidentally or whether it be on purpose, you know, that's a penalty. It's contact in the box. He was nowhere near the ball. Gazzaniga, I think his name is, the Spurs keeper. He was nowhere near the ball. He literally punched Sakho in the head. And obviously, the ref, and this is another point brought up on home radio, when there's a penalty situation, the ref always seem to make up their own choices. They make up their own rules. But in this game, and as the rules say, this should have been a penalty. You know, if the player completely misses the ball and injures another player or hits another player or tackles another player, when they've completely missed the ball, that's a penalty. So this one was no different. You know, Sakho's gone to get on the end of a header. Obviously the ball had gone slightly away from him, so you know, he probably wasn't going to get it anyway. But that doesn't mean that the Spurs keeper has to also miss the ball and slap him or punch him in the head. So in terms of that, that could have been a penalty, and that was within the first sort of 10 minutes of the game. So if we had scored that, and Milivojevic has certainly got a good record at scoring penalties, that would have been 1-0 up within the first 10 minutes, and maybe it would have changed the whole complex of the game. So in terms of that, obviously it was great that he got on the end of a cross, but like I've said, and like other people have said on social media and obviously former referees, we certainly should have had a penalty. So do comment below in the YouTube comments or contact us at eCrystalPalace on Twitter whether you do think it was a penalty. But in terms of the game as a whole, like I've said already, he was a threat from set pieces, so he had a couple of chances to score. But like I said, because he's not a striker, he's not an out-and-out attacker, he, on quite a lot of occasions, he couldn't quite adjust his body position in time, and that includes the chance where he got on the end of a cross but couldn't quite time the header alright. But in terms of his whole defensive play, I thought he was really good. He was playing really resolute, I suppose. Yeah, resolute is a word we could use. I thought he was playing really well defensively. But there were a few times, you know, I've given him a 7, and I could have given him an 8 for the fact that he puts his body on the line. But I've given him a 7 purely because although he was really good defensively, there were a few times where he put his teammates into a spot of bother, and that was not all the time, but there was 1 or 2 chances, especially when he was passing the ball to Jeffrey Slupp in the second half. There were a few times where he put them in a spot of bother. So we all know Mamadou Sakho, and I saw it in this game, a few, you know, turns where the Spurs players in front of him, Sakho does a simple turn to get the ball past them, or he'll just, you know, simply turn back and pass it to the keeper, or, you know, he'll outmuscle them and drive forward. So whatever he'd done in terms of getting the ball back from the defence and picking up or going forward or stopping the Spurs getting the ball, he was really good at that. But there were a few times where he had the ball and he overthinked it. So rather than, like he done on a few occasions, that just, you know, taking the ball past the attacker, there were a few occasions where he went the simple option, passed to Jeffrey Slupp, and Jeffrey Slupp was in no space, meaning he got closed down really quickly, and we lost the ball on a few occasions. So although he was good at carrying the ball and, you know, keeping hold of it, there were a few times where he was giving these passes to Slupp when Slupp wasn't in space. And then you could also put criticism on Slupp, because instead of just clearing it, he waddled about, messed about, and then, you know, we lost the ball from that. So in terms of Mamadou Sakho's performance, I've given him a 7. A really solid defensive performance from him with loads of headers and blocks. Could have had a penalty and should have had a penalty. You know, had a chance to score. Missed it because he couldn't quite get his positioning right, and he didn't hit it first time. And in terms of his, you know, carrying the ball forward, he was really good in that aspect. But he needs to improve on his game in the fact that he can't just keep passing to Slupp and putting him under pressure, when actually, you know, if there's nowhere to go, you just pass it back to the keeper. There's no need to put another player under pressure. But Mamadou Sakho, once again, the summer signing, a solid performance from him. Now to move on to his centre-back partner, Scott Dann, who I'm also going to give a 7. Also could have given Palace the lead with a header from a corner in the first half, but was denied by a super Gazzaniga save. won a fair few headers at the back though and looked good throughout. So Scott Dann here, the captain, I've given him a 7, and much like his performances have been in the last few games, it was a pretty solid defensive performance from the captain. And when you consider, at the beginning of the season, the end of last season, he wasn't really playing up to scratch. He's finally, certainly the last sort of few games under Roy Hodgson, he's certainly started to bring back the consistency to his game. So he's continuously putting in 6 and 7 rated performances, and that's really good to see. The fact that he's back to his best, where he's not necessarily having really great games, but he's doing the right things defensively. And in this game, much like Sacco, I thought he was really good defensively, although obviously not fantastic in the fact that whenever we had the ball we kept hoofing it, but the fact that we stayed defensively solid throughout the game, you've got to give him credit for that. But in terms of, like what I said with Mamadou Sakho, Scott Dann also could have given us the lead within the first sort of few minutes of the game. Once again, another nice delivery into the box by Yohan Cabaye. Scott Dann, who we know who's really good in the air, got his head on it. Brilliant header going down to the bottom corner, and I believe it's you pronounce it Gazzaniga, but the Spurs keeper, he made a really great save. So in terms of that chance, Scott Dann within the first few minutes of the game could have put us 1-0 up and changed the complex of the game. But like I've said, he hasn't really been winning that many headers recently in terms of attacking opportunities. But in this game, it was nice to see his sort of old trademark from a few seasons back, where he was, getting on the end of a set piece. And like I said, that header was really good. It was going bottom corner, and unluckily for us, the keeper made a brilliant save. And in terms of his defensive performance, there isn't really much to say. Much like what I said with Mamadou Sakho, but he won loads of headers at the back, and he looked really good. There isn't really anything fantastic about his game. He just done what a defender had to do, a sort of a nitty-gritty defensive performance, done what he had to do. And, the only word I can think is good, because he done exactly what he did, what he had to do. And I've talked about this with Sakho, but when you've got Harry Kane, one of the best attackers in the world, you've got to defend really well against him. I thought that Scott Dann, when under pressure, he would clear the ball, he would clear the box as well. He'd done that really well. And in terms of that physical battle and defending against Harry Kane, he done really, really well at that. And when you consider that he's one of the best strikers in the world, the fact that it was Dan's job to mark him, and he done a good job at that, you've got to give him credit for that. So in terms of his performance, I think a 7 is fully deserved. Once again, a lovely solid defensive performance. Wasn't really troubled by Harry Kane, and when you consider the goal did come from a super strike from Son, you can't really put any blame on the defence, because really they done their job in the fact that they kept quiet one of the best attackers in the league. And when you consider Spurs ran riot against Real Madrid, and won 3-1, when you consider they came to Palace and only won 1-0, it shows how resolute and how good our team was defensively. But Scott Dann, the captain, I've given him a 7, another fairly solid performance from him defensively. Now to move on to the left back, Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 6. Had a mixed game against Serge Aurier, put in some good challenges but let the fullback pass a few too many times. Was taken off for Saka with 15 minutes left as Roy Hodgson went for it. So Joe Ward here, I've given him a 6, and when you consider how he had a slight off game against West Ham, when you consider how good his performances were in the Chelsea game, and maybe you could argue the Newcastle game as well, but when you consider he played quite well in these games, he had an off game against West Ham, and because he was playing out of position against Spurs, you wouldn't expect him to have a good game. And when you consider he was marking Serge Aurier, Spurs, one of Spurs' summer signings, a great player, and as we've seen in the past, but I thought Joe Ward had a mixed game. So like I've said with Slupp and Rose, Serge Aurier running down that flank for Spurs, and Joe Ward had a mixed game marking him. So it wasn't an absolute terrible game like a few seasons ago, or like a few months ago, with someone like Hazard or someone like Rashford, ripping Joe Ward apart. It wasn't like that, where Serge Aurier was able to get down that flank and get past Joe Ward every time. But in terms of his whole defensive performance, it wasn't great, and it was sort of a mixed game. So he had good chances where he put in some nice challenges and blocks, but then there was also a few times, much like Danny Rose on the other flank, where he was awarded too much space. And when you consider Joe Ward isn't quite the fastest player, and he's playing out of position, you can expect, Serge Aurier to run past him a few times. And when you consider the pace that Aurier has got, or at least the pace he's got more than Ward, you can expect him to run past him quite a lot of the time. But in terms of playing out of position, I thought he done really well. He stopped Aurier's advances, so he stopped Aurier as much as he could get him forward. And when you consider Spurs didn't quite have as much influence offensively as they would have liked, and we restricted them, that you've got to give credit to Joe Ward as well for stopping someone like Serge Aurier, who's going to put crosses into the box and is actually going to go for it. But in terms of his performance, obviously I've said it was sort of a mixed game. You could say an average game from Joe Ward, and that's why he was taken off. So he was taken off for Sacco in the second half, with about 15 minutes to go. So Roy Hodgson, obviously I thought this was a really great move for him. We wanted to try and at least get something from the game. So we moved Sacco up front, moved Jeff Slup back to left back. And actually that gave us a little bit more balance in the team because we had a bit more pace in defence and we actually had a target in Bakary Sacco to actually play for it. And when you consider Roy Hodgson, he saw that we were having chances, so he thought, let's go for it, and took Joe Ward off. And that's not to say that Joe Ward was having a bad game, and I personally looked at it and went, Joe Ward's going to go off because we're going to change the formation, but I don't think it's down to his performance. And certainly I don't think he had a terrible performance. It's just that towards the end of the game, maybe he was tiring, and because he was playing out of position, we changed the team up a bit just to go forth and actually get something from the game. But in terms of his performance, something that Roy Hodgson's done over the last few games where he's been using Joe Ward, and maybe this is something they're doing on the training ground, but obviously Joe Ward, under De Boer, maybe under Pardew as well, you could argue, beginning of last season, he was sending Joe Ward up to go forward and go and attack the ball. Whereas in the last few games, he's rarely ventured forward, he's rarely gone forward, and I think that's Roy Hodgson just trying to keep it simple. And players like Joe Ward, you always get the best out of them when you keep it simple. So in terms of Ward's performances, they've improved drastically when he's been told to primarily defend, barely go forward and attack, and that's really improved his game. And in this game against Spurs, we saw exactly that. So his task was to defend against Aurier and maybe, stop someone like Son if he cut in from the left hand side. So his aim was to stop them guys and stop Harry Kane. He'd done that really well, and because he'd done his job defensively, it meant that he didn't get to go forward. And I'm not going to criticise him for that, because I personally think I'd rather see an alright performance and an average performance from Ward where he doesn't go forward but does an alright job defensively, as opposed to him trying to go forward, trying to do the spectacular, and then, because he hasn't got that pace, he has that trouble tracking back. But Joe Ward, I've given him a 6. I think that's a fair result for him. Now to move on to Luka Milivojevic, who I am going to give a 6. Put in some robust challenges as per, but found it difficult to pass to his teammates today for some reason. Had a brilliant chance to open a scoring at the back post, but found Gazzaniga in inspired form with another save. So Luka here, I've given him a 6, and much like what we've seen this season, when Luka's playing in that defensive midfield role, playing where he likes to play best, he's absolutely superb. And although he wasn't as good as he was against West Ham last weekend, I still thought he put himself a bit about, himself about the pitch quite a lot in the game, and that's why I've given him a 6. And when you consider how good Wanyama is and how you can see for Spurs how good he can control the midfield, someone like Luka's, he's our sort of type of player who controls the midfield and does that defensive midfield role. And maybe you could argue in this game he's probably one of the best midfielders on the pitch because his job was absolutely superb. But in this game, much like what we've seen from him quite a lot this season, loads of robust challenges. So he was going in, winning the ball back, trying to get the ball off the opposition, and also in terms of Harry Kane, and I'll keep going back to him, he keeps scoring goals in the league. We managed to stop him, so you've got to give credit to the defensive midfielder, obviously for making these robust challenges and tackles, but also for giving that protection to the back line. But in terms of the only negative, I suppose you could say, from his performance, defensively it was great, maybe a 7 out of 10. But I've given him a 6 because he'd done all the good work. He was able to make the challenge and win the ball back. But quite often in the game he wasn't able to find a teammate, and that was just for some reason. So whether it's because maybe he was just having an off game and he couldn't quite find that pass, or whether it's because you've got to give some blame to other players for not being in the right position. Whatever it was, he wasn't really passing the ball to his players and his teammates in the team, which he normally is pretty good at. So in terms of that, defensively a 7, maybe a 6 just for overall play, purely because he was not getting the ball to his teammates, and whether that's because his passing was off, or maybe it was just because there was no options available for him. But like I've talked about with Dan and Sacco, he had a brilliant chance to score. Gazzaniga, he was absolutely superb in this game, and when you consider he's Spurs' third choice goalkeeper, you wouldn't know that from looking at this performance, because he put himself about a bit. Considering he hasn't played, I believe it's maybe a year of Premier League football, he didn't look any different to a Premier League keeper, because had a fantastic game and was just pulling off saves left, right and centre. And one noticeable one, much like the Dan and Sacco one, is, you know, the free kick. I believe it was a corner actually from Kabay, got whipped in. The first header went up in the air, bit of head tennis. Luka got it onto his head. Lovely, powerful header into the top corner on that left-hand side. And Gazzaniga managed to make another save. So in terms of that, another great chance for Palace to score. You know, obviously a bit of head tennis is not ideal, but Luka got his head on the ball, headed it goalwards, and Gazzaniga was in. He was in you know, inspired form, much like Joe. Much like Joe Hart was last weekend. Gazzaniga in this game was in fantastic form and was making saves left, right, and centre. But in terms of how you could describe Milivojevic's performance, obviously I've already talked about defensively. He was absolutely solid and being a rock, and he had that goal scoring opportunity. But in terms of how he played, you know, effectively all he done, he slowed the play down, so he would make a tackle, slow the game down a bit, you know, frustrate Spurs, and then when necessary, he'd prevent Spurs from making any sort of great deal of momentum. So whenever Spurs were breaking forward, Luka would step forward and stop Spurs from actually building any great momentum from that attack. So that could be whether he would just, you know, take a tactical foul or make a tackle or make a block. Whatever it was, he'd done what he could, and effectively all he done was slow down the game. Obviously making tackles and stuff as well, but he was stopping Spurs. That's how pivotal it was. He was stopping Spurs from having any really great deal of momentum. So in terms of his performance, a really great performance. And you know, I've said this quite a lot this season, but games are won and lost in the midfield, and we personally, in my opinion, could have gone on to win this game purely because of how good our midfield play was. The fact that we, although we didn't have the possession, we still dictated play quite a lot throughout the game, and I think that Luka had quite a lot to do with that. But Milivojevic here, I've given him a 6. I think that's a fair result. Now to move on to his midfield partner, Yohan Kabay, who I am going to give a 7. Had a good game and was getting stuck in everywhere. Should not have given the ball away to Son with a weak clearance, or at least should have closed Son down quicker for the goal, but should share the responsibility with Luka. So Yohan Kabay here, I've given him a 7, and much like Luka's performance, I thought he had a really great performance in the midfield and was quite crucial to not only winning that midfield battle, but at keeping Spurs at bay. And when you consider in the last few games he's been playing quite offensive, in this game where we were under pressure, he was, you know, called upon to play a slightly more defensive role where he'd go back and help Luka defend, and I thought he'd done fantastically, you know, done a fantastic job there. And in terms of what I explained in that sort of summary brief, you know, I thought he had a really great game, and much like Luka, he was getting stuck in everywhere. So not only was he just staying central, he'd do his job out wide, you know, whether that be covering the fullback or just, you know, going out wide to stop the player. So he was getting stuck in everywhere. He was putting in tackles left, right and centre, and like I said, having a solid game in terms of stopping Spurs having any more advances or having chances to go forward. And you know, I thought in terms of his set pieces, they were excellent throughout the game. You know, the fact that Sacco almost scored from one, Dan almost scored from one. You know, the chance that Luka had, Kabay was the original guy who put the ball into the box. So in terms of his set pieces, although they've been off recently, in this game, absolutely fantastic. They were on point. And in terms of his crosses and, you know, his corners, they both created a sort of a handful of goal scoring opportunities for Palace. So when you consider how good the Spurs defence is, the fact that Kabay is able to put in a dangerous delivery into the box which causes trouble from corners and from crosses and maybe a few of the free kicks, that just shows how important it can be. And unluckily for us, the goalkeeper was making fantastic saves. But the fact that Kabay was able to put pressure on the opposition by putting in a really great ball into the box, you know, is credit for him. And when you consider we didn't have that many clear-cut chances other than the ones that, say, Wilf missed, but the chances we did have, quite a lot of them were, you know, created by the creativity of Yohan Kabay. But the only really bad thing about his performance, and, you know, some people could argue I should give him a 6, but I've given him a 7 because other than that mistake he did for the Son goal, I thought he overall had a really, really good, solid defensive game. But in terms of the mistake he made, obviously there was a bit of tennis in the box in the fact that we were just clearing the ball instead of trying to play it from the back and then clear our danger. Obviously the saying is, if in doubt, hoof it out, but we kept doing that with every time we got the ball. So the ball came into the box from Rose, got cleared out the way, got to Moussa Sissoko, got cleared away, and then Yohan Kabay, ball came to him, and I don't know whether it's just because he was lazy and just tried to clear it and chip it over Son, or whether it's just because he slipped when trying to make the clearance. Whatever it was, he should take some responsibility for the goal. So the fact that he gave Son the ball, so he went to clear the ball, it was such a weak clearance, Son was able to take a touch round Kabay, so Kabay, there was no way he could stick a leg out and block it, and obviously we scored, Spurs scored from that. But a great goal from Son. You can't take away any credit from him because it was a lovely curling effort. But Yohan Cabaye really should have been much better with that clearance. So whether it would be taking a touch and then just clearing it out wide, or whether it be taking a touch and passing it out wide, whatever it be, he should have done better as to not just try and whack it long and then you end up missing it because you can't get it off the ground and then the opposition goes on to score. But in terms of that, that's the only thing I can really criticise him for. The fact that he gave the ball away to Son. And even if he did give the ball away, yeah, sometimes players make their mistakes. Maybe, he gave the ball away. Maybe he should have at least closed Son down. So if you look back at the replays, he sort of tried to stick his leg in the way, tried to get in the way of the shot. But really, what would have been better, if you look back at the replays, Son has took a touch to get the ball away from Cabaye. So rather than just standing there and trying to stick a leg out, maybe he should have tried to at least close down Son and, make it difficult for Son to A, make the space, or B, have that, have too much time to get the shot away. But in terms of Cabaye's performance, I've given him a 7. A really great defensive and offensive performance from him once again. Putting his shift in everywhere on the pitch, putting in some, the only word I could use to describe his set pieces is delicious. So his set piece delivery were delicious, and he created a number of opportunities for Palace to score. But we've got to really criticise him for is the fact that he gave the ball away to Son, where he should either be putting his foot through it and clearing it out for a throw-in, or taking a touch and just at least being calm with the ball and not just trying to fling it long and give it away to the opposition. But other than giving the ball away to Son, a fairly solid performance from him and a well-deserved 7. Now to move on to Jeffrey Slop, who I am going to give a 6. A bit lost today in that central role. Found it particularly hard when Dembele came on and started to dictate things. So Jeffrey Slop here, I've given him a 6, and although some may argue that he didn't have his best game in a Palace shirt, I still thought, much like what Joe Ward did, he still had an alright game, and although he didn't do anything fantastic, he still, in terms of our performance as a whole, although the whole team had a great performance, I don't think he was the best player, but he didn't let himself down in terms of his performance compared to the rest of the team. But in terms of him playing in that midfield role, it's been quite debated whether his best position is playing as a winger, playing as a left back, as a left wing back. Whatever his best position was, it certainly doesn't look in a more central role, because in this game, with him playing on that left hand side, obviously he was doing well to support Ward, but other than that, he looked a bit lost. He weren't really playing up to scratch, and wasn't really doing much in that central role. So unlike someone like Cabaye or Loftus-Cheek, who was at least trying to drive forward and use his skill to get ahead in the game, Jeffrey Slop, who was obviously trying to play in that left hand side role / centre role, whatever you want to consider his role to be, he didn't quite have as much impact as he would have liked. And when you consider in the second half, when obviously Spurs brought on some reinforcements, they brought on Dembele. We know how good Dembele is, and he did certainly start to dictate the game in the second half. But when he came on, and obviously he started to dictate things like he normally does, obviously Jeffrey Slop seemed to get even more lost. But obviously Roy Hodgson saw that, and he saw that we wanted to try and at least go for the game, so he moved him to left back. He improved slightly when he played at left back as opposed to when he was playing in the midfield, but still it wasn't a fantastic game. But there isn't nothing really too critical I can pull out about his performance, because obviously playing in that centre role, in that midfield role, didn't really have a good game. When he moved to left back, and when Dembele came on, he found it difficult, but moved to left back, improved slightly. But the one thing I could say is there was a few chances where, or a few times in the game where he played himself into trouble, and that's purely because obviously I said that Sacco needlessly played the ball to him and obviously put Slop under pressure. But there were a few chances where he was in acres of space, and rather than try and cross the ball forward or pass it back to the defence or to the midfield, he'd try and, he'd just stand there. So there was a few chances and times in the game where he got the ball at his feet, and rather than try and drive forward or cross it forward or pass it back to Mamadou Sakho, he'd just stand there with the ball, and by the time he eventually finds a pass, there's a player on him and he loses possession. So in terms of that, there are a few times, and especially when he's playing in that midfield role, where he got himself into trouble purely because he was just taking too long on the ball and he was getting dispossessed quite a lot. And then, the final thing really about his performance, and what just sums up what was quite a lacklustre performance from Slop, is the fact that he picked up a needless yellow card. So some may say, sometimes you have to make a foul and get the card, but I don't think there was necessarily a reason for him to make that foul. So obviously got a needless yellow card. Don't think, obviously we're quite close to the new year now, so it's not he's probably not going to get suspended unless he gets in the next, maybe 9 games he gets 4 more yellow cards. But in terms of that, it wasn't really necessary for him to get booked there, and it wasn't necessarily, obviously, for him to make the foul there. But Jeffrey Schlupp here, I've given him a 6. I suppose the word to use is lacklustre. It wasn't a great performance from him. He did struggle in that midfield role, and especially when Dembele came on. Moved to left back, improved slightly, but not the best game from him. And hopefully, obviously, with the 2 weeks the week's international break, he can get back up to playing to the standard and the ability he was playing at last season. But a 6 for him, I think, is a fair result. Now to move on to Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who I am going to give a 6. Needs to play in the middle, not outside. His most telling contributions were blocks in his own box when Palace really needed him to be getting involved at the other end. So Loftus-Cheek here, I've given him a 6, and when you consider how good he was against West Ham when he was moved to a central role, you would expect him in this game not to play well purely because he was playing out wide, and that was the case once again. He started the game much like Jeffrey Schlupp was, playing in a more wing role, so not playing in the middle but playing outside, and he did struggle throughout the game, and he needs to play in the middle, because in the second half, when Roy Hodgson moved him to a central role, his performance improved drastically. It went up tenfold. So that just shows really that Ruben Loftus-Cheek, to get the best out of him, you need to be playing him in a central role. And when you consider he was playing out on the wing, his most telling contributions were actually getting blocks in his own box, and that's all great. It's great to see him finally getting in that defensive contribution, but you can't just have him doing that, because he's meant to be an attacker, he's meant to be an attacking midfielder, so he should be at the other end of the pitch assisting Zaha and Townsend when they go on the counter-attack. So in terms of that, he wasn't really getting involved at the other end, and I personally think that's probably down to the fact that he was playing out wide. But when he did move into the centre role, obviously he was playing slightly better in the fact that he was helping Palace on the counter-attack, but didn't really do too much to assist Townsend and Zaha. And in terms of his performance, even if you are playing out wide, you can still drift in a few times, but we didn't even see that in the game. So other than that block in the box, he didn't really offer anything much to the game. But like I've said, and I've said this week in, week out, as soon as we get Benteke back, obviously Loftus-Cheek won't have to play out wide and they'll play down the middle. But in the meantime, we need to play someone else out wide, because Loftus-Cheek seems lost when he plays out on the wing, and as soon as we move him into the centre, he seems to play really well. So we need to play him in the centre. That's quite crucial. And obviously in the games that have just gone past, we've seen how good he can be when he's moved into a central role. So instead of moving him now, midway through the game when it looks like obviously he's clearly lost, we need to start moving him into that central role earlier, or at least starting him in that central role, because otherwise we're just not utilising the skill and ability he has. But something I did mention with Fosu-Mensah is the fact that obviously Danny Rose was given too much space, and that's because Fosu-Mensah was playing quite narrow. But Loftus-Cheek, obviously because he was playing on that flank with Fosu-Mensah, Loftus-Cheek should have been drifting back, much like Schlupp was doing on the other side, and going back and helping tracking Rose's run. So not necessarily going back into the box and making a challenge, but he should at least stop Rose from having so much space if Fosu-Mensah's drifting inwards and giving Rose so much space. And even if Fosu-Mensah isn't playing that narrow, he still needs to help Fosu-Mensah and support him, purely because we know how potent Spurs are on the attack, so we just want to nullify that attack completely. But in terms of his performance, I've given him a 6, although he didn't play brilliant in the middle, so he didn't play brilliant out wide, came into the middle, improved drastically. He put in a decent shift going forward, wasn't great, and in terms of his high pressure game, I thought he done really well on quite a few occasions to actually play quite high up on the pitch in the second half, win back possession, and there were a couple of occasions where he actually done that, where he won the ball back and actually started an attack for us. So if he had done that in terms of going forward, if he had done that throughout the whole game, it would have been an even better performance from him. But do comment below what you think is his best position. I personally think it's a more central role, and I would like to see Roy Hodgson play him in a more central role in the upcoming games, purely because when he's playing out wide, his skills and his attributes are, we aren't taking advantage of them. But Loftus-Cheek here, a 6, I think is a fair result. Now to move on to the forward, Andros Townsend, who I am going to give a 7. Ran his socks off and could have opened the scoring if it weren't for a brilliant fingertip save from Gazzaniga. Set up Zaha for Palace's best chance with a defence-splitting pass. So Andros Townsend here, and I keep saying this week in, week out, but it was an absolutely fantastic performance from him. And it wasn't just his performance, much like what it's been in the last few weeks, but it was just his work rate and his stamina throughout the game was absolutely fantastic. And, if you want to look at his stamina and just prove how much effort he put into the game, just look at the fact that he ran his socks off for the whole game. He was someone who was doing everything on the pitch. He was running everywhere, trying to do what he could offensively, and obviously going back and absorbing that pressure when Spurs were attacking. So everything in this game was absolutely fantastic, and he's one of these players who definitely this season is up there with one of the players of the season. Obviously Wilfried Zaha, he's took the limelight for the goals he's scored, but Andros Townsend, in terms of his performances and his work rate and the fact that he doesn't stop and he keeps going forwards and he keeps trying to create chances, everything like that was fantastic. And he was much like what Dan and Sacco and a few other players had. They had chances to score in this game, and Townsend, obviously he was playing fantastic throughout, but there was another great chance where it would have topped off, it would have been a cherry on top of the cake of his performance, and that's the fact that he, on the counter-attack, took a shot in the box, and Gazzaniga, it looked like going top corner, and Gazzaniga once again made a lovely fingertip save. So in terms of that, obviously he almost got rewarded for his hard work and his commitment. So his work ethics are fantastic, he works hard for the team, does what he can, he has brilliant stamina to keep going throughout the game, and really was unlucky not to score, because he did deserve to score with this performance and based on it. And if it wasn't for that fingertip save, then obviously we wouldn't have been able, we would have been able to maybe go on and win the game, because that would have changed the course of the game. But once again, Gazzaniga, fantastic saves, but Andros Townsend, great that he's actually, now he's got the work rate done, but now he's trying to, like what he done last weekend, he's now, starting to add goal scoring opportunities to that hard work and commitment he gives in the game. But in terms of another offensive thing he did, Zaha, obviously I'll go on to talk about him later on, but Zaha missed an open goal opportunity. But before that, Palace's best chance, so this was our best chance of the game. Zaha's obviously gone through and rounded the keeper and missed, but it was all because of Andros Townsend. So Andros Townsend picked up the loose ball from Spurs. Spurs were trying to play it on the edge of our area. Andros Townsend intercepted the ball. He ran forward all of his pace, and his pass was absolutely superb. I believe it was about 30-yarded pass. Lovely curl on it to get it out to Zaha, who was playing just narrow on that right-hand flank. So he, lovely drifted ball to to Zaha from Townsend. Obviously Zaha couldn't quite finish it, but the fact that Townsend was able to put in that cross, lovely curling effort, the fact that it went 30 yards and the keeper wasn't able to get it, but Zaha was just able to get it, the fact that he timed it right, the fact that he got the distance right, was absolutely superb. And if you look back at it, obviously on the counter-attack it was fantastic, his pace, but that pass as well, that 30-yarder pass, that intricate pass to Zaha from Townsend was absolutely fantastic. And there's not many players in that Palace team who could put a pass like that into the box. We've seen Cabaye do it last season, but the fact that Townsend on the counter-attack, we didn't have many opportunities, but the fact on the counter-attack he was able to take that chance and put that ball in and put pressure onto Spurs on the counter-attack was absolutely superb. And obviously, much like the rest of the team, it was quite a lacklustre first half. We weren't fantastic first half, but in the second half, sprang into life, and that's obviously when he created that chance for Zaha. He almost put Palace ahead with that driven effort, but the best thing about his game, other than his work rate, was that superb, exquisite pass he put into Zaha. And it's a shame that Zaha didn't score, whether it's because Zaha was off balance or he just, he was looking at the ground rather than looking up and just shot, as opposed to looking up to where the ball should go. Whatever it was, a brilliant pass from Townsend on the counter-attack, and it was quite unlucky that Zaha wasn't able to score from it. But Andros Townsend here, I think a 7 is a fair result. Now to move on to the other attacker, Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 6. Somehow missed Palace's best chance of the game when he rallied Gazzaniga but rolled it past the far post with the goal gaping. Should have thrown himself as a Townsend crossed a minute or two later, but didn't quite have that striker's instinct. So Wilfried Zaha here, I've given him a 6, and where else to start but that open goal miss he had. And I mentioned it with Townsend, the fact that on the counter-attack, Townsend put that delicious pass into Zaha, and it looked like maybe the keeper was, he came off his line, it looked like maybe he was going to claim it, but Zaha stayed really composed, got the ball around the keeper, and then instead of looking up, and this is something the whole radio once again picked up, instead of him looking up and seeing where the goal was, he just hit it first time, obviously was a little bit off balance from rounding the keeper, and obviously the ball went wide. But in terms of that opportunity, when you've got such a great pass in a game where you're not going to have that many chances to score, but when you've got a chance like that, you get a ball like that from Townsend, that delivery with pinpoint accuracy, you've got to take your chance, and obviously Zaha didn't. And obviously the skill to get on the end of the cross was superb, and the pace to accelerate. that's all fantastic, and the fact that he rounded the keeper was great. So that's like the 2 steps done, step 1 and step 2. But the third step is obviously to score, and obviously as he rounded Gazzaniga, there was an open goal there, and he obviously shot wide. And something that whole radio picked up is the fact that if he had been looking up, he would have been able to just see where the goal was and just shot. But because it was off balance slightly, he was looking down at the ground, he still had to think at the moment. He just, instead of hitting it accurately, he just hit it first time and it went wide. So in that occasion, obviously we know Wilf's a really great finisher, as we've seen this season. You know, people have been criticising him for his lack of end product. He's certainly shown that he's got it now, but in this game, obviously he didn't use it to the best of his ability. So instead of looking up and looking where the goal was and actually making sure it's accurate, he just hit the ball first time. So in the next few games, we need to make sure, obviously we've been playing with the Ivory Coast, but we need to make sure that he's obviously you've got to make sure that you can dribble with the ball and look at the ground and get past players. But in an occasion like that where the goal's gaping in front of you, you need to make sure that actually you can get on the end of the cross. You can either get on the end of the cross, or you'll be able to finish it there. So a great chance there created by Townsend. Zaha done 2 things right, get on the end of the cross and then got the ball past the keeper. But then, like I've said, if he was looking up, he would have been able to easily score. But because he was looking down and because he was off balance, because the keeper came at him, he obviously missed that chance. And in terms of Townsend again, a few minutes later, Townsend put a lovely cross into the box, and Zaha really should have thrown himself at it. And we know that Zaha isn't the best header of the ball, and he admitted it himself. But obviously, he hasn't got that striker's instinct like Benteke, like Wickham, to actually get in the end of the cross and head the ball in. But even if you're not good at that, if a cross from Townsend comes in as good as it was, you need to make sure that you can get yourself on the end of it and just do whatever you can. Throw yourself at it just to score from that. And when you consider he missed the open goal a few minutes earlier, you would expect him to at least try and make up for that by at least trying to get in the end of Townsend's cross. But ultimately he didn't. But to be honest, the only thing really to talk about his game is that he should have put us ahead. So I've given him a 6 purely because although he had that pace and that ability to go forward on the counter-attack, and other than Townsend, he was our best attacking threat. But, he really should have scored. So, obviously he had an off game, and players occasionally have off games. You look at Hazard against Palace a few weeks ago. People say that Hazard is one of the best players in the world. Yes, admittedly, he may be one of the best, but sometimes he has off games like he did against us. And Zaha just had an off game here, He should have scored when he got the ball past Paulo Gazzaniga, but obviously, quite astonishingly, he missed. But to be honest, as a whole, obviously he was having an off game, but as a whole his finishing was quite somewhat wayward throughout the game. So although his finishing has improved over the last few seasons, in this game, obviously he had an off game overall, but his finishing in this game was totally wayward as well. But Wilfried Zaha here, I've given him a 6. Once again, he's using his pace to his ability and showing us the skill he's got. And in terms of being our talisman, he done it in this game once again. But he really should be finishing that chance, not just because he obviously got past the keeper and it was an empty net, but also because the fact that what it took to make that chance, the fact that Townsend put that cross in, yes, it would have been nice if he scored, and it would have been nice if he looked up and finished, but it would have been even better for Townsend because of how well Townsend set up the attack. So it's not necessarily all about Wilf sometimes, because sometimes really brilliant play like that, excellent play, sets him up. But in terms of that, great chance there, and obviously unluckily for us he missed. But hopefully over the international break he can get a bit more game time with the Ivory Coast, hopefully come back with no injuries and come back raring to go for the game against Everton after the international break. So now to move on to the sub. Obviously there were subs this week, but there was only one sub who came on, and that is Bakary Sakho, and he came on for Ward quite late in the game, about 15 minutes left, and that's purely because just to put a bit of pressure up front. So by putting Sakho on the field, it meant that we moved our 2 wingers, Zaha and Townsend, out wide to where they were more effective, and we just had a target. So rather than playing with 2 strikers who are not really strikers and who drifted out wide, we had a target in Sakho, and we all aimed our attacks to him, and he had a few chances to create. But really, he didn't really do anything, didn't really trouble Spurs, and really did fail to make an impact. And when you consider he came on with 15 minutes to go, you're not going to expect him to do wonders. And unlike the game against West Ham, where I thought he had a really great impact, in this game, he didn't quite have an impact and didn't really give us any more than the team was missing. But the only thing I will give him credit for is the fact that he would apply pressure to Spurs. So the fact that he put Spurs under pressure and actually try and make them make an error, that was great. But in terms of his ability on the ball, didn't really have any clear-cut chances. And even when he did, he didn't really do quite a lot of them. And when you consider he's come off the bench, I personally thought he would have started. If we've got confidence in him to come off the bench and start like this, if he does want to start a game, which I want him to, because I would rather have him than no striker. But if he wants to start games, then he needs to start, at least trying to make an impact off the bench. But that's not to, put any downers on him. The fact that he played well in the respect that off the ball he was putting pressure on them, but when he had the ball, when we were attacking, he worked really fantastic. And so if I was to give him a rating, I'd probably give him a 5 for his overall game. But in terms of the performance as a whole, even though we lost the game and we lost another game in the Premier League, it was a really, really great performance from the team. Every player on the field put in their utmost effort, even though they might not be having the best game. And ultimately, performances don't mean anything. It was about the result. It was another loss for us. But then when you consider their goalkeeper was in superb form, if it wasn't for him, obviously Hugo Lloris is a great keeper as well, but if it wasn't for Gazzaniga in the goal, we probably would have scored 3, maybe even 4 goals you had. And you can see now in the squad that Roy Hodgson's certainly starting to have an impact on the players. He's making them more organised and much more harder and compact to beat. But obviously it's a tough loss when you consider that we at least deserve something better from this game, particularly when you consider we had the better chances throughout the game. We were playing really well defensively, stopping Spurs. So when you consider we had that organisation, we played better and we had the better chances, we certainly deserved something from the game. But however, even though the performance was really great and the result wasn't good, hopefully these run of great performances, against West Ham, against Newcastle, against Chelsea, hopefully these great performances can help us to push on in the next few games, because if we do want to have any chance of survival, then our next 8 games are absolutely crucial. So if we perform like we did against Spurs today, hopefully our chances of survival will go up, because in the next 8 games we have a chance to get ourselves out of this trouble. So hopefully with performances like this we can continue our great form and hopefully get something from the next few games. So now to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and why I thought had the biggest influence on the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now before I do give you my nominations, I must mention that although this was another loss and some may see it as another bad result, actually it was a really great team performance and another really good showing from the team. So our team are finally showing that actually Roy Hodgson is starting to have an impact in terms of us being more defensively organised, and the fact that we're actually creating a few more meaningful opportunities on the counter-attack now. So although you would see it's quite a bad result, we've lost another game, but actually the performances are slowly improving, and the fact that we kept Spurs quiet, who have been really good recently, it's credit to the way the team played, because I thought defensively we were really solid and we got beaten by a brilliant goal, and offensively, although we didn't score and we missed a few open chances, the fact that we're creating more meaningful chances now and the fact that we're having that organisation in the team is fantastic. But do comment below with your Man of the Match and whether you do agree with the nominations I put forward. But the 4 nominations are Scott Dann, Mamadou Sakho, Yohan Cabaye and Andros Townsend. So Scott Dann and Mamadou Sakho, I've put them both on there because they both were defensively solid in the game and both had chances to score. Yohan Cabaye because of how well he controlled the midfield and the fact that his set play deliveries were absolutely fantastic, and the fact that he ran the midfield as well. And then Andros Townsend, obviously mainly for that pass to Zaha, which ultimately he didn't score with, but also just his general attacking threat. So using his pace to his advantage, cutting inside, having shots, getting in behind the defence and putting in crosses. Everything offensively about his game was absolutely fantastic. But to be honest, if I am going to give it to one person, then it's really hard to pick for me between Cabaye and Townsend. But purely because of Cabaye, I'm going to blame him slightly for the goal we conceded. Because of his weak clearance, I'm going to give it to Andros Townsend. So congratulations, Andros. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was a very solid attacking performance from you once again. But I've got to give credit to most of the team because most of the team did perform. But Scott Dann and Mamadou Sakho, I could have easily picked one of those because of how well, how good they were defensively. But Andros Townsend, just purely because of that attacking threat, is why I've put him on there above of, Dann, Sakho, Cabaye. But personally for me, one of his better performances this season, and although he didn't score, I thought he had a really good attacking threat. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man and match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got an exclusive interview with Roy Hodgson and Scott Dan following the game.
Scott, can we get your thoughts on what was a very close game today?
Obviously disappointment. I thought we deserved something out the game. We had quite a few chances, especially in the second half, and just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. And when you play against the top teams, sometimes you miss them chances, you get punished at the other end, and that's the way it felt today. But I thought we more than matched them for large parts of the game, and we showed that the performances are improving, and hopefully we keep performing like that, and we can start putting some more points on the board.
Second game in a row, you've come up against a keeper in inspired form. It was a great save from your header, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was in at the time, but he's got down through the bodies and managed to save it. There was a couple of other saves he made as well. Yeah, it's disappointing that we can't manage to turn them chances into goals. But hopefully, if we keep performing the way we do and keep making the amount of chances we are, the goals will start to go in.
Harry Kane's been in fantastic form recently. Are you pleased with how you managed to keep him fairly quiet today?
Yeah, he's obviously a top player, and that's what you want to do, play against the top players week in, week out. But evidently we ended up losing the game, so regardless of any individual things, we need to keep performing like that, but we need to start picking points up, and that's what we'll be looking to do in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, it's a nice run, isn't it, after international break? Well, not a nice run, but it's a run of games against teams that are in and around us in the table.
Yeah, I mean, no game's ever easy in this league, as we've found out over the years, and each one's going to bring its own threats from the opposition. Hopefully, if we keep performing like we have in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we can start to put a run together to start climbing the table. But we need to stay positive and stick together.
Boy, a very close game today. Can we get your thoughts on the performance?
I don't think I can ask much more than the players gave me and the club today. I mean, it's quite interesting that the Tottenham crowd was so quiet. You know, I heard our crowd and the support from them more than I actually heard the support from the Tottenham crowd. And considering we were a small number compared to them, that shows that we had enough of the ball and were doing enough to keep the crowd excited. But once again, we've fallen foul of the 2 penalty areas. I thought their goalkeeper made a lot of saves. You know, I thought we were pretty dangerous, you know, throughout the game. I thought we kept them and restricted them to a bare minimum, considering how good they are attacking-wise. But of course, they took one of the few chances they created.
Yeah, the team's looking a lot more organised now. Can you take positives from that kind of performance?
You can take positives from everything, I suppose, but the bottom line is that it's another match gone by, another week gone by, and another week with no points. And although we should be taking some sort of heart from the fact that we can play these teams, we can play Newcastle away, we can play Tottenham away, and come out of the game with some credit, and without people recognising that there's a huge gulf between the 2 teams, the bottom line is it's on both occasions it's been the opponent that's got the goal and we haven't got our goal. So it's hard for me to take positives from it, because I believe that if you don't get points when you're playing well enough to deserve points, there's going to be periods, unfortunately, where you deserve nothing because you're playing badly. Now at the moment we're not playing badly, and you know, we should have at least 2 more points, if not more, on the board from the 4 games, but we haven't got them.
But after the international break, we have got a run of games against teams in the bottom half of the table.
It doesn't interest me, the bottom half of the table. Every game's going to be a tough one. Just like Tottenham today, this should have been a walk in the park for them after beating Real Madrid. They've gone away probably thinking that, if anything, they were quite lucky to take all 3 points today. So, you know, it doesn't matter where people are in the table. It's of no interest. We've got to produce performances and produce work rate like we've done in the last 4 matches. But then we've got to get something out of it by making certain that we score from our chances and stop them scoring from the relatively few chances they get.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Scott Dan had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Tottenham. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against Everton. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.